August 24th, 1945, Luzon, the Philippines. The rain had turned the soil into brown glue that swallowed our bare feet. The air reeked of rust, smoke, and sweat. Flies gathered around the trash pits where old uniforms and rice husks festered. Somewhere beyond the barbed wire, an American Jeep rattled by, its engine coughing against the humidity. I remember thinking, so this is how defeat sounds. I had been a nurse with the Imperial Japanese Army, 24 years old, the daughter of a merchant from Nagasaki. When we surrendered, I was with a small medical detachment outside Manila, caring for wounded soldiers too broken to be moved. The Americans took us in without a shot. I expected humiliation. Instead, they gave us water. Diary entry, August 26th. I am alive, but I do not understand why. We were told they would kill us. Instead, they gave us biscuits that taste like chalk and kindness I cannot explain. There were about 300 of us, mostly women, a few older men, a handful of teenage conscripts. The guards were young Americans, boys really, their accents sharp like broken glass. They watched us from towers while we lined up for meager rations, rice mixed with cornmeal, watery soup, sometimes canned peaches if someone felt generous. The first days were heavy with silence. No one dared to look at them. We bowed when spoken to, even when they didn't ask us to. Our pride was a mask that cracked under the sun. I still remember the day the beatings began. They didn't come from the Americans. They came from us. One of our own, Sergeant Tanaka, had once been a camp disciplinarian. Even as a prisoner, he strutted through the yard with that same clipped arrogance, barking orders we no longer had to follow. When a woman beside me dropped her bowl, spilling rice onto the mud, Tanaka slapped her so hard she fell. "You shame Japan," he hissed. His hand left a red print on her face that matched the blood on her lip. No one moved. That was the way it had always been. Discipline first, compassion later, if ever. But then, from the other side of the wire, one of the Americans shouted, "Hey, cut that out!" At first, I thought my English was failing me. Then he was inside the compound, pushing through the gate before his comrades could stop him. He was tall, with sandy hair and the kind of tan that looked carved by wind and war. His name tag read Patriot J.R. Collins. His rifle hung loose at his shoulder, but his eyes burned with something fierce and human. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled, stepping between Tanaka and the trembling woman. Tanaka barked something in Japanese, but Collins didn't understand. Or maybe he didn't care. He just stood there, chest heaving, and pointed at the sergeant's hand. "No more of that. No one hits anybody here. You got that?" The rest of us froze. The world felt upside down. For years we had been taught Americans were monsters. Soulless, brutal, eager to desecrate us. And yet here was one, defending a Japanese woman from a Japanese soldier. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain hammered the tin roof like a heartbeat. Every drop sounded like a question I couldn't answer. Diary entry, August 27th. Today, an American stopped one of our own from beating a woman. I cannot decide which is more painful, to be saved by an enemy or to realize we needed saving. The days blurred into a routine. Roll call, rations, medical inspections. I helped in the infirmary, cleaning wounds with boiled water and shredded cloth. Supplies were scarce, but the Americans brought more each week: gauze, iodine, even morphine. I didn't understand why they'd spend medicine on prisoners. Collins would sometimes stop by the infirmary. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried the awkward gentleness of someone trying to bridge two worlds. Once he handed me a tin of condensed milk and said, "For the sick ones, don't tell the sergeant." It was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. There was talk in camp that Japan had been bombed with a weapon beyond imagination. 2 cities erased in seconds, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I thought it was propaganda, but when one of the American medics showed me a newspaper with photographs of flattened streets and shadows burned into walls, I knew. My hometown, my mother's street. Gone. I didn't cry. Not then. Tears felt like a luxury for people who still had a future. The Americans began allowing short walks outside the wire, groups of 5 at a time, under escort, to collect firewood or fetch water. On one of those walks, Collins walked beside me, The jungle smelled of rain and rotting fruit. "You folks had it rough," he said quietly. "War's over now. Time to stop hurting each other." I wanted to ask him how. How do you stop a war when it's carved into your bones? How do you stop seeing an enemy when your whole life told you to? Instead, I said, "Do Americans forgive?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "We try. Sometimes that's all you can do." After that, word spread that the Americans were building a hospital in Manila and might transfer us there to work. It was strange, hope creeping into a place built for punishment. But not everyone welcomed it. Some of the men whispered that Collins was soft, that the Americans' kindness was a trick to humiliate us further. Others, mostly women, began to look at him with something like gratitude. The camp slowly changed. Tanaka no longer shouted. The guards stopped watching us like animals. One night, a gramophone played from the guard post. Slow jazz, distant and haunting. For the first time since surrender, I felt something fragile awaken inside me. Maybe it was peace. Or maybe it was exhaustion pretending to be peace. Weeks later, I saw Collins again during a rainstorm. He stood under the watchtower, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. I asked him if he missed home. He laughed. "Yeah, but maybe home ain't a place. Maybe it's just the people you stop fighting." When I lay down that night, I realized something terrifying. I was beginning to believe him. Still, every dawn reminded me of who we were. Prisoners. Losers of a war that consumed everything sacred. Even kindness, when it came, felt dangerous, like stepping into sunlight after living too long underground. But Collins didn't stop. When another soldier tried to shove one of our women aside in the chow line, he grabbed the man's wrist and said, "We're better than that." The man backed off, muttering. Collins didn't even look at me, but I saw the way his jaw tightened, as if holding back all the rage he'd learned from the war. In that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not just in me, but in all of us. We had seen mercy come from the hands we feared most. Diary entry, September 1st. Today, the guard protected us again. Not from hunger or rain, but from becoming like the men who started this war. Maybe that is how peace begins. When night fell, I looked through the barbed wire and watched lightning roll across the mountains. Somewhere beyond, ships were leaving Manila Bay, carrying soldiers home. I wondered if Collins would be on one of them soon. I wanted to thank him. I wanted to tell him he'd changed something I thought unchangeable. But the words never came, only silence, and the rain, still falling, washing the blood of the old world into the soil of the new. And that was the moment I realized. Even in defeat, you can still witness humanity. And that can be the hardest thing of all. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment, so we can keep uncovering the forgotten human stories of war, one voice at a time. October 1945. Manila, Philippines. The ruins still smelled of smoke and salt. You could hear the city trying to breathe again. Church bells cracked by bombs. Children chasing empty cans through rubble. The slow rhythm of reconstruction. I arrived at dawn, on the back of an American supply truck, wrapped in a gray blanket that still smelled of disinfectant. The road to the hospital passed through ghost streets, where entire buildings stood like broken teeth. The U.S. Army had turned an old Spanish convent into a field hospital. Its courtyard was half flooded from the rains, and the chapel's stained glass was gone, replaced by sheets of canvas. They assigned me to Ward 3, burn victims, both Japanese and Filipino. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or condemned. The head nurse, a broad-shouldered woman from Michigan named Lieutenant Helen Reeves, gave me a look that was somewhere between pity and suspicion. "You were a nurse, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Good. We're short on hands. Just don't faint at the sight of what your boys did." She wasn't cruel, just honest. My first patient was a Filipino boy, maybe 16, with burns down his chest. His village had been shelled by retreating Japanese troops. When I tried to clean his wounds, he flinched. Not from pain, but from seeing my face. I whispered, "I'm sorry," though I knew it meant nothing in any language. For weeks, I moved between beds, washing, binding, injecting. The smell of iodine mixed with the faint sweetness of rotting flesh. Every motion felt like penance, every heartbeat like an accusation. Yet amidst it all, there was rhythm. Orders shouted, morphine measured, bandages rolled tight, and that rhythm kept me alive. Sometimes, Collins came through the wards with medical supplies. His uniform was cleaner now, his eyes less haunted. "Didn't think you'd make it out of that camp," he said once, handing me a crate of syringes. "Guess you were tougher than you looked." I wanted to tell him that survival wasn't toughness. It was luck wearing a dirty uniform. One evening, Reeves ordered me to assist in surgery. The patient was an American pilot pulled from the jungle. His body was torn apart by shrapnel, his dog tag still clinging to his neck. When the anesthesia took hold, I noticed the letters stamped on the metal. U.S. Army Air Forces, B-29 crew, Nagasaki raid. My hands froze. Nagasaki, my home, my family, my entire world. "Scalpel," Reeves said sharply. I obeyed, hands trembling. The smell of blood filled the air, iron, salt, and memory. I wanted to scream. "You bombed my city," but I just kept working, because his blood was red like everyone else's. When the operation ended, Reeves placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good," she said softly. For the first time, I realized she didn't see me as an enemy anymore. Just another pair of hands trying to keep someone breathing. That night, I went to the courtyard to wash the blood from my arms. The sky was full of stars, the kind you never saw during the war. Too many fires, too much smoke. Collins found me there, smoking his usual cigarette. He offered one silently. I shook my head. "Reeves says you're one of the best," he said. "Guess we picked the right side to lose to." I smiled, though it hurt. "There are no right sides in hospitals," he nodded, flicking ash into the puddle at our feet. "Yeah, maybe that's the only place people stop fighting." The next morning, a truck arrived with new prisoners. Japanese soldiers captured in the mountains, filthy and half-starved. The sight of them hit me like a mirror I didn't want to look into. They bowed when they saw me, unsure whether to see me as comrade or traitor. Collins told me they'd be treated in Ward 4. Over the next weeks, whispers spread among the prisoners. Some said I was sleeping with Americans for better food. Others spat near my feet, muttering "Ona no urajirimono," woman traitor. I ignored them, but the words stuck like thorns. I hadn't betrayed Japan. Japan had betrayed us first. One night, one of the new prisoners, Sergeant Nakamura, cornered me behind the supply tent. His eyes were wild from fever and shame. "You think helping them will wash your hands?" he hissed in Japanese. "You think they'll ever see you as human?" Before I could answer, Collins appeared out of nowhere, grabbing Nakamura's arm. "Back off," he said, his voice low but deadly. Nakamura spat near his boots and stalked away. Collins didn't say anything for a moment. Then he muttered, "War's over, but the hate ain't." I wanted to tell him hate doesn't just stop. It seeps into everything, like smoke in your lungs. But the words got lost somewhere between English and grief. Later, Reeves called me into her office. "You can leave soon," she said, pushing a form across the table. "Repatriation ships are heading back to Japan." My heart stuttered. "Japan?" I whispered. "Yes. Nagasaki's been opened for returnees." The world tilted. Nagasaki. The name felt heavy and hollow all at once. I couldn't sleep that night. I walked through the dark halls, past rows of sleeping men, listening to their breath like waves. At the far end of the ward, I found the pilot, the one from Nagasaki, still unconscious but alive. His chest rose and fell under the thin blanket. I stood there, watching the man whose plane might have killed my family, and I realized I didn't want him to die. That terrified me more than hate ever had. Days later, the hospital held a small ceremony for the nurses. Reeves shook my hand. "You made a difference," she said. Collins stood beside her, grinning in that shy, uneven way. "Guess this is goodbye," he said. "I'll remember you," I told him. And I meant it. On the morning I was set to leave, I found a folded note slipped into my medical satchel. It was in careful handwriting, slightly smudged. "You taught me what peace looks like. Maybe that's harder than winning a war. JRC." I read it 3 times before the truck came. As the vehicle rolled toward the docks, the rising sun caught the edge of the hospital's roof. I watched it shrink behind me, thinking of all the lives stitched together inside those walls. Filipino, American, Japanese. Pain didn't have a uniform anymore. Neither did mercy. When we reached the harbor, the smell of the sea hit me like a memory. Ships groaned against their ropes. Some were leaving for America, others for Japan. Mine was gray, with a red cross painted on its side. A mercy ship, As I stepped aboard, I realized I was leaving not as a prisoner, but as something harder to define. Not free, not forgiven, just aware of what people could be when they stopped obeying the orders of hate. The ocean stretched endless and silver, the sky blinding above it. Somewhere out there was a home that no longer existed. Somewhere behind me was a man who'd shown me what humanity could look like after hell. And between them, me, a woman trying to learn how to live in the quiet after war. January 1946. Nagasaki Harbor. The sky was gray as tin, the sea colder than silence. Our ship slid into port without fanfare. Just the hiss of ropes, the clatter of boots, and the smell of ashes that never left the air. From the deck, I saw the city that used to be mine. But it wasn't a city anymore. It was a wound. Where streets had once shimmered with paper lanterns, there were only skeletons of buildings and fields of blackened rubble. The mountains still framed the bay, but their slopes were bare, as if the trees themselves had fled. Smoke curled from the ground in thin, ghostly threads, rising from places where the earth had been too deeply burned to heal. A Japanese officer in a faded uniform barked orders as we disembarked. Form lines. Present identification if you have it. I had none. Only a Red Cross tag that said, POW Repatriate. It felt heavier than any metal. The first breath of Nagasaki air made me dizzy. It smelled of dust, burnt metal, and something sweet. Like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, death had its own perfume. I walked through what used to be the fish market, now a wasteland of melted glass and collapsed beams. Somewhere under that ruin had been my father's store. I found it by instinct, not sight. The sign was gone, but the old stone step was still there, cracked but standing. I knelt and touched it, cold, lifeless. The weight of everything I'd lost pressed into my chest until I could barely breathe. A woman passed by pulling a wooden cart filled with scrap metal. Her face was thin, her eyes clouded with radiation sickness. She stopped when she saw my Red Cross band. "You're back," she said quietly. "You're one of the lucky ones." Lucky. The word cut like a blade. I spent the first night in a makeshift shelter near Urakami River. Rain dripped through the holes in the roof. There were maybe 20 of us. Widows, orphans, old men with empty eyes. No one spoke much. When someone coughed, others turned away. Everyone knew sickness was as common as hunger. The next morning, I went to what was left of the hospital district. A new facility stood among the ruins, an American-run relief center. White tents marked with red crosses. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same emblem that had been painted on ships delivering bombs now offered food and medicine. An American officer stopped me at the gate. "This area's restricted," he said, though not unkindly. I explained I had medical experience and had worked with U.S. forces in Manila. His eyes narrowed, but after a pause he said, "Wait here." He returned with a tall man in a khaki jacket. It took me a moment to recognize him. Collins. He looked older, leaner. The tan had faded, replaced by the pallor of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. But when he saw me, his mouth curved into that same uneven smile. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "You made it home." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The world shrank to the space between us. The ashes, the wind, the impossible coincidence. "Home," I repeated. "If you can call it that." He led me through the relief camp, explaining that he'd volunteered to stay behind with the occupation forces. "We're setting up hospitals, orphanages," he said. "Trying to make things right, I guess." I wanted to ask him what right even meant now. Inside the main tent, rows of cots stretched to the canvas walls. Children with bandaged heads. Women too weak to stand. Men missing limbs. The air buzzed with flies and quiet suffering. Collins handed me a surgical mask. "We could use someone like you." And just like that, I was back to nursing the broken. Only now, they were my own people, and the ones helping them were those we once called demons. For weeks, I worked side by side with Americans and Japanese doctors alike. Every wound told a story, and every story asked the same question: why are we still alive? One afternoon, a young boy was brought in with severe burns. His mother had died shielding him during the blast. His skin peeled like paper when I tried to clean it. He screamed until his voice cracked, and I had to turn away to keep from crying. Collins was there, handing me gauze. "You can take a break," he said. I shook my head. If he can't, neither can I. That night, I dreamed of the hospital in Manila, of Reeves and her steady hands. I dreamed of the pilot from the Nagasaki raid, and wondered if he still breathed. In the morning, I woke to the sound of an American radio playing soft jazz. Benny Goodman, I think. For a few seconds, the world felt normal. Then I looked out the tent flap and saw the ruins again, and the illusion shattered. In late February, news spread that Emperor Hirohito had spoken over the radio, urging cooperation with the occupation forces. Some wept. Others cursed. I just felt empty. Patriotism had become a language I no longer understood. Collins and I often walked to the edge of the city after shifts. He'd light a cigarette and offer it to me, the way he always had. "Ever think about leaving?" he asked once. "Where would I go?" I said. "Everywhere I belong is gone." He nodded, exhaling smoke into the wind. "Guess we're both stuck ghosts then." We talked about things that didn't belong to war. Music, coffee, snow. He told me about his sister in Ohio, who sent him letters filled with drawings from her kids. I told him about the persimmon tree that used to grow outside my window. "If it ever grows back," I said, "maybe that means Japan can too." He smiled. "Then I hope it grows soon." But not everyone in the city shared our fragile peace. Some former soldiers began attacking collaborators, those who'd worked with Americans, or even accepted food from them. One evening, as I walked back from the camp, I felt eyes on me. 2 men stepped out from an alley, faces shadowed. "Nurse," one said in a low voice. "We heard you work for the occupiers." Before I could answer, the other spat at my feet. "Traitor." They followed me for a block before peeling away. But the message was clear. Mercy was still dangerous. Compassion, still treason. The next day, Collins found me sewing bandages and said, "You look like you haven't slept." "I dreamed of fire," I said. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "You've lived through enough. Maybe you should get out of here. Go north, start over." "I can't," I said quietly. "If I leave now, who will remember what happened here?" He didn't argue, just reached into his pocket and handed me something small, an old dog tag, dented and tarnished. "Found it in the rubble last week," he said. "Figured you'd want to keep it safe." It wasn't his. It belonged to a Japanese soldier. I traced the kanji engraved on the metal. Yamamoto K. My brother's name. My throat tightened. "Where?" "By the riverbank," he said softly. Didn't know it'd mean something. I couldn't speak. I just held the tag in my fist until the edges cut my palm. That night, I went to the river alone. The moon floated pale above the ruins. I buried the dog tag near the water, whispering my brother's name into the wind. When I turned around, Collins was there. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. I had to say goodbye. He nodded. "Then let's make sure it's the last one." We stood there in silence, listening to the city rebuild itself one hammer strike at a time. For the first time, the air smelled less of ashes and more of rain. Weeks later, I saw tiny buds sprouting on a tree stump near the clinic. It took me a moment to recognize it. The persimmon tree. Somehow, life had found its way through scorched earth. I called Collins over. "See?" I said, pointing. "It's growing back." He grinned. "Told you it would." And for the first time since the war ended, I believed that maybe, just maybe, peace could grow too. But peace is fragile, and sometimes it demands more courage than war ever did. September 1946. Nagasaki. The cicadas had returned. Their droning filled the ruins like a chorus of ghosts refusing silence. The air was thick with salt from the harbor, and the smell of wet concrete as new houses rose where craters used to be. Rebirth and rot shared the same breath. Every morning I walked through the city with my medical satchel, passing children playing among twisted rails, their laughter echoing where screams once did. The relief camp was smaller now. Most Americans had gone north to Tokyo or home to the States. Only a few stayed behind, including Collins. He ran logistics for the reconstruction teams. Bridges, water pumps, roads. No more barbed wire, he liked to say. Just things that hold people together. The clinic's days blurred. Burn treatments, malnutrition, births, new life from the ashes. One morning, a woman went into labor on the floor of the ward, her husband long dead, her body frail from radiation. I stayed with her for 12 hours until a small crying girl slid into the world. The mother named her Hikari, light. I washed the infant, wrapped her in a towel, and realized my hands were shaking. Not from exhaustion, from awe. Later, when I told Collins, he smiled. That's the kind of victory we needed all along. I didn't answer, but I knew he was right. The Americans organized a small cultural exchange that autumn. Music, food, shared work. It felt strange watching soldiers who once burned our cities now repairing playgrounds beside Japanese carpenters. Reeves wrote me from the Philippines, saying she'd been reassigned to a hospital in Guam. If you can forgive the world a little, she wrote, maybe the world will return the favor. I kept the letter folded in my pocket like a charm against cynicism. One afternoon, I found Collins by the shoreline, stacking wooden crates into neat rows. Orders came through, he said without turning. My unit ships out next month. Back to San Francisco. The words struck harder than I expected. And after that? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe school. Maybe just sleep. He finally looked at me. What about you? You could come work with the Red Cross. They're hiring translators, nurses. Real pay. New start. For a moment I imagined it. Docks, travel, the world beyond ruins. But then I saw the persimmon tree, now full of green fruit, outside the clinic window. This is where I belong, I said. Someone has to stay and remember. He nodded slowly. Guess that's your kind of courage. The weeks passed faster than I wanted. Together we cleared debris from what had once been Urakami Cathedral. Beneath the stones, we found fragments of glass saints melted into strange shapes, faces blurred but still reaching upward. I kept one piece, no larger than a coin. When I held it to the light, it glowed crimson, like a frozen sunrise. The day before Collins's departure, we shared tea in the courtyard. The air smelled of rain and persimmons. I used to think soldiers and nurses lived in different worlds, he said. Turns out we just fight different battles. Yours are cleaner, I teased softly. He smiled. Not always. He took something from his pocket. An envelope. For you. Don't open it until I'm gone. I slipped it into my satchel, my throat tight. Will you come back? He looked toward the sea. Maybe, if the world learns how to stay kind. That night, the wind rose over the city. I couldn't sleep. I walked to the harbor and watched the lights of the departing ship blink against the horizon until they vanished into the dark. The sea was calm, indifferent, eternal. I whispered, thank you, though I wasn't sure if it was for him or for the chance to have met Mercy where I least expected it. Weeks later, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, me in the Manila infirmary, unaware he'd taken it. On the back, written in his neat, awkward hand, to the woman who taught me that peace isn't a treaty. It's a choice we keep making. I cried then. For him. For my brother. For everyone who never got to make that choice. The years that followed blurred into rebuilding. I worked at the Nagasaki Red Cross Hospital when it opened officially in 1947. The city healed in slow, stubborn layers. New families moved into the neighborhoods near the river. The persimmon tree bloomed each spring, bright against the gray walls. Children laughed beneath it, unaware that the ground they played on had once glowed like the sun. Sometimes American officers visited the hospital, bringing supplies or vaccines. Each time I caught myself searching their faces for a trace of Collins. But he never returned. The world kept moving forward, indifferent to the stories buried beneath it. Yet I never forgot. Because remembering, I realized, is its own kind of resistance. Diary entry, December 1947. Today I treated an American child. His father works with the occupation government. The boy smiled at me, offered candy. For a moment I saw no uniforms, no borders. Only the fragile miracle of survival. As I walk through Nagasaki now, the air hums with the sound of new life, factories rebuilt, ships back in the harbor, school bells ringing again. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can still hear the faint rumble of the past, the boots, the sirens, the prayers swallowed by fire, and yet, over it all, there's the echo of another sound, the voice of an American soldier shouting, "No more of that, no one hits anybody here." That moment, in that filthy camp in Luzon, changed everything. It planted a seed in the ash, a seed that grew into this fragile, stubborn thing we call peace. So if you're listening now, if this story found you across time and distance, remember this: wars end on paper, but humanity only begins when someone decides to stop the next blow from falling. And if that truth moved you, subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Not for me, but for every forgotten voice still echoing through history, because the more we listen, the fewer wars we'll have to survive.